What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We're here with some more MMA DFS picks and lineup advice, FanDuel and DraftKings UFC Vegas 64, Marina Rodriguez, Amanda Lemos. All 12 fights. We're here to break it down for you. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, joined by Jake the Snake, owner of MMADFS.com. Jake, what's happening, dude? It's been a couple weeks since we've done the show. How you been?
I know, man. Feels like it's been forever. Doing good, man. Coming off a good week. Looking forward to another one.
Yeah, definitely a great week last week. I know your bets and your content crushed some good DFS success. And honestly, there's a lot of similarities between last week's card and this week's card as far as the experience level of a lot of fighters, which is generally our sweet spot. It's generally where we get a big edge over the field. So if you guys are new here, what we normally do is we break down the main event, what it means for betting and DFS. We talk about the newcomers. We do have one fighter making their debut on Saturday night. We'll talk about what their style is like, what we can expect from them in their matchup. We'll play good fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. For fighters that have less than 5 UFC fights, try to give some context to their UFC stats and their game logs. And pretty much every single fighter on the card qualifies for that game, which is great for us. Again, this is where we really shine. We'll give you a fight that you have to target in DFS. Whoever wins is likely to score very well. You see the Prize Picks promo on the screen. We'll give you our favorite Prize Picks play, and then we'll give you a stream parlay. Jake and I will pick a prop each, and we'll parlay it together for you. So lots of great action, 10, 15 minutes long. Let's get into it. So, Jake, this main event, Rodriguez and Lemos, not. I think it'll be an exciting main event from a viewing standpoint, but that doesn't necessarily always translate into high DFS scoring.
Yeah, man, I totally agree with you there. I think it's gonna be a fun fight to watch. They're both high-level Muay Thai Brazilian strikers. They're both 35 years old, fighting for a top spot in the division. But from a DFS perspective, we've seen Rodriguez been in a couple five-round fights. She won. She scored 89, 85 DraftKings points. I mean, that's not going to cut it at 8,800. So I think if she wins the decision, most likely we're going to see a similar score. Lemos is a super dangerous striker. I don't think Rodriguez is going to be able to come in reckless. And I think a key point is that this fight had been scheduled to go 3 rounds up until a couple weeks ago when it got elevated to 5 rounds after the Bryce Mitchell fight fell through. So they weren't preparing for 25 minutes. So I think they're going to have to kind of pace themselves a little bit. And I think that's also going to lend towards a little bit lower scoring fight unless we see, first round finish, late second round finish, some sort of well-timed finish. So Lemos, I think the other issue with her is just cardio, She's had cardio issues in 3 round fights. All of a sudden she gets this boosted up to a 5 round fight on a couple of weeks notice. I mean, that's putting her in a really tough spot. So I think it's going to be hard for her to have a volume driven decision. I think she's always been sort of a round one or bust fighter, but I think especially now it's going to be harder for her to win a decision because she's just going to be struggling in those later rounds. So I think it's more likely that if it goes the distance, we're going to see Rodriguez win. And if Rodriguez wins, it's more likely not going to be in the winning DraftKings lineup based on her price.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. But just looking at their game logs or fight logs, I guess a lot of the field will probably feel similarly. We see female main events with lower ownership overall. Do you see that happening again this week as well?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, they're both projected in like the low 30s. So, I mean, that's way down. Normally, we see the main event favorite up in the 40s. So, I mean, yeah, you will get her at lower ownership. So, if Lemos does gas and if Rodriguez can capitalize and put up a big score, then it's actually a decent leverage spot on a main event favorite. So, I mean, that is some upside in tournaments is she will be lower owned and we only have a 12 fight card. So, you're always looking for ways to get unique. So, yeah, actually, bizarrely, you can get unique by playing the main event favorite a little bit here.
Pretty rare. And in low risk contests, because this fight is expected to go 5 rounds for the most part, looks like a good stacking opportunity, right?
Yeah, I think so, man. I think we're still gonna have decent floors on them. I think it's really just the ceiling that we're concerned about. So yeah, you still want to stack it in low risk.
Totally fair. All right, let's talk about newcomers on the card. Just one, and it is someone we actually charted already when we looked at Eileen Perez, who made her debut a few slates ago, a few weeks ago, whenever it was, and we saw her fight Tamiris Vidal, in which she was dominating Vidal the entire fight in that daycare center match, but lost to an illegal knee or illegal strikes, whatever it was. Now Vidal couple fights later is making her UFC debut. So, Jake, all that into account, what did you see on her in her tape, and what can we expect from her in this first matchup?
Yeah, I thought it was really funny. The first thing I told you at the week, I was like, "Oh shit, it's that girl that lost to Eileen Perez in the warehouse fight." So yeah, I mean, obviously, like coming in just not a good fighter. I mean, I mean, that was her second most recent fight was that DQ win against Perez, and this I don't know how that's like a sanctioned fight. You have like a foam floor. I mean, it's like
Go watch it, people. If you're watching this, go just. It's easy to find, easy to Google Perez versus Vidal. Just go watch it for your own entertainment.
And I mean, Perez fouled her at multiple points in that fight. It wasn't even just the one at the end. She like
Right.
kneed her low early on. I mean, it was just ridiculous. But then, so Vidal had one more fight after that. It was against a girl that was a decent boxer but had no grappling, and Perez was. I'm sorry, not Perez. Vidal was able to take her down and end up heel hooking her. So I mean, she has okay jujitsu. She's a BJJ black belt, but really not a good striker. Just throws like big overhand rights, not very technical, not very active, likes to clinch up against the cage. And I don't think she makes very good decisions. You'll see she'll give up top position to lean back into a guillotine, lean back into a heel hook, just things that coaches would never tell you to do. Be like, no, don't do that. And then she does it. And then occasionally it works out. But she's been fighting a really low level of competition. She did have a fight against Carol Hosa. That was a submission loss on her record, which is actually her only official loss. But for the most part, I think you have to kind of question who she's been fighting. I mean, I guess she did fight Eileen Perez, who is now in the UFC, but Perez got smoked in her UFC debut. So what does that say about Vidal?
So there you go. I mean, I wanted to ask you this too, right? So obviously it's a low level matchup against Pascual, and we'll talk about Pascual here in the good fighter, bad fighter portion. But Vidal only checked in at what 134 or whatever it was under the weight limit, and
Mhm.
when you add in that, I wanted to get your perspective on what you think that generally means when a fighter checks in under the weight limit in their debut, and then just talk about how many fighters missed weight and what we think that means for this card.
Yes, I actually thought that was pretty interesting because Vidal has fought up at 145 before, so I was not expecting her to come in under. I mean, normally it means that the person could be fighting on a lower weight class. I was not thinking that Vidal would be a candidate to move down to 125, considering she's fought at 145. And honestly, the only reason I even thought they were bringing her on was maybe they're trying to get a body up at 145 because the division is just so small. Maybe they want her to move up, but yeah, I was pretty surprised at 134. So I would say that probably not thinking about moving up to 145, and yeah, I don't know. It was pretty strange. I mean, normally I would say that she's a little undersized, but I mean, she's pretty thick at 135. So it's kind of a head scratcher, I would say.
For sure. And then what about all these other fighters that missed weight? We had her opponent, obviously, and then a bunch of other fighters. I think 5 or 6 missed weight. Does that impact your decision making in DFS or betting when that many fighters miss weight? Or are you looking to target those fights more? What are you thinking just overall?
I mean, I think in general, when we've seen underdogs miss weight, they really struggled to win. Favorites have done a little bit better, but still performed worse than their expectations. I mean, we had Pascal missed by a pound, Candelario missed by 2.5 pounds, Lopez, who hasn't fought in years, missed by 2.5 pounds, Shanna Young missed by a pound, Grant Dawson, who recently moved up to 155, still missed weight by a pound and a half. I mean, just total mayhem on the scales today. I mean, I can't remember the last time we had 5 people, on only 12 fights, almost half the fights, someone missed weight. So, I mean, really crazy. I do think you probably want to look at the opponents of the people that missed weight, especially when it was an underdog missing weight, because that's generally an indicator that they're not going to perform super well. Um, I mean, yeah, I mean, the fact that we just have more of them, I guess that just gives you even more options to target the favorites there.
For sure. All right. So a couple of those fighters that you mentioned are in the sub 5 UFC fight range. So let's just go from the top of the pricing board down on DraftKings. Fighters who have 4 or less fights in the UFC. How it works is Jake would just simply say if they're actually a good fighter or a bad fighter, and this matchup is a good matchup or a bad matchup for a DFS scoring. Jake Hadley at 9,200.
I think it's man. I don't think he's a good fighter yet. I think has potential in the future, but as of now, I'm still going to call him somewhat of a developing bad fighter. But I think it's a decent matchup. We saw Candelario get dominated on the mat in his last fight.
What about the flip side here? Candelario only has 1 UFC fight under his belt.
Yeah, I don't think Candelario is a good fighter, man. Been super inactive. He didn't fight for like 4 years after his first appearance on Contender Series, and I think it's a bad matchup. I think Hadley actually has pretty good jiu-jitsu, so the way Candelario would want to win, he's been shooting for a ton of takedowns, but I think he's going to be in danger if he does that here. And I think he's going to gas out, and the fact that he missed weight by 2.5 pounds certainly isn't going to help that.
For sure. All right, let's go back up to the top of the pricing board here. We have Shailan Nurdembeka making his fourth UFC fight.
He's an improving fighter. I would say he was a bad fighter going into his last fight. His striking looked better there, but it's a terrible matchup for him. He's a wrestler going against a guy that does nothing but go for submissions, specifically guillotines. I mean, terrible matchup.
For sure. For sure. We were talking about that all week. All right, what about Johnny Munoz making his fourth fight as well?
Yeah, I think he's a bad fighter, but I think it's a pretty good matchup against a low level guy that is 0-1 in the UFC, washed out at tough. Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm not sold on Muniz. He has really good grappling, but I think he's a little chinny. Doesn't have great striking. He is going against a wrestler here, so it'll be interesting to see if he's able to get it to the ground. That would be the only reason to call it a bad matchup is, the takedown defense of Shailanan. Yeah,
Close enough. And is
not
he
gonna
is
say
is,
anything,
is, is he a bad fighter, a bad matchup as well? The flip side?
yeah, man. He hasn't fought in 14 months. He lost a decision to Jack Shore in his debut. He got knocked out of the Ultimate Fighter. I think he's a bad fighter. He hasn't. I was looking at his pre-UFC record. He had like 7 wins over guys that had no professional fights. So I mean, super padded record. I think we have to call him a bad fighter, and it's a bad matchup because he's a wrestler going against a BJJ guy. So he's going to be at risk of getting submitted if he goes to the ground like he wants to.
Yeah, that's tough. That's a tough matchup. All right, what about Tagir Ulanbekov?
Yeah, it's another one-dimensional guy. I don't think we can call him a good fighter. He's like another one of these Russian wrestlers. He's a decent wrestler, but not great. And on the surface, it's a bad matchup against Maynes, who has a 77% takedown defense. But Maynes is coming down a weight class, looks like a skeleton on the scale. So I think it's kind of an under the radar, sneaky high upside matchup in terms of a DFS perspective. And I think it's actually a pretty interesting one in that regard. But I mean, Tagir has not looked good. He's 2-1. Could be 3-0, could be 0-3 right now in the UFC.
I think that's very fair. What about Josh Parisian? Moving on down here to a fight that we'll talk about a little more in depth here in a couple seconds.
I mean, he's clearly a very bad fighter, but it's a very good matchup.
For sure. All right. Pasquale, who we talked about in the Vidal matchup.
Yeah, terrible fighter, great matchup.
Okay, fair enough. That's what it's about sometimes. And then Mark Madsen only has 4 fights under his belt as well. I guess he's as old as hell. That's why it made me think he had more. But what are your thoughts on him?
Man, I don't know if we can call him good. He's like a wrestler, but he gasses out when he wrestles. He's not a great striker. He's been like grinding out slower paced decisions lately. And I think it's a bad matchup against Dawson. I think Dawson is actually, despite the fact that Madsen's an Olympic wrestler, I think Dawson is actually probably a better wrestler and definitely a better submission grappler. So I think that Madsen's kind of screwed wherever he goes here. If he wants to wrestle, he's probably going to get out wrestled or out grappled at least and potentially submitted. And I think on the feet, Madsen's nothing special. So I think he's a bad MMA fighter. I mean, he's a decent wrestler, bad MMA fighter, and a bad matchup.
Tough to see. Benito Lopez, who has sold more houses than UFC wins in the last 5 years.
Yeah, man, he hasn't fought in forever. So I'm calling him a bad fighter, and I think it's a bad matchup.
And then finally at the bottom, Shauna Young, only 3 fights.
Yeah, terrible fighter, terrible matchup.
All right, moving on. Let's talk about a fight that you have to target in DFS. Whoever wins likely has a really, really great score for your DFS lineups. Before we get into that, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We're doing videos for UFC every Friday when there is 12 fights or more. Sometimes we'll do live Q&As on Saturdays when there are pay-per-view cards. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you like NFL, you like NBA, we're doing videos every single day. So just subscribing to the channel helps you get notified when you go live because we're doing so many videos. I've talked about this in other videos. Sometimes the YouTube algorithm doesn't push it to you. It doesn't like when we put out multiple videos. So if you like this video and you want to see it again, just make sure you subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. Lets us know to continue making these videos. Any questions, comment on the video below. Any concerns, questions, comments, put it in the video below. We'll answer you before the slate locks. And if you want to join our Discord server, ActiveFantasy.com/Discord is where you can chat with us, sweat out the fights with us and other members of the community. So with that aside, Jake, a fight that you have to target in DFS that whoever think wins probably scores well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be the Sherman Parisian fight. I mean, not only should the winner score well, they're very affordably priced, so it's going to be hard, even if they score decently, but not ridiculously, for them to get left out. I think we're either going to see Sherman land a knockout on the feet, or else Parisian's going to take him down, and Sherman's going to die of exhaustion and get finished on the mat.
Can't wait to see that fight. All right. Prize Picks. You see the promo code here on screen. Jake has been putting them in his content, OccupyFantasy.com content as well. All these sports are happening. Prize Picks has props for basically every single sport. You can parlay cross sports, so you can take some of these UFC picks, pair it up with NFL, NBA, whatever you choose. Use our promo code OCCUPY to get a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100. Just use promo code OCCUPY. So, Jake, which line stood out to you this week over on Prize Picks?
Yeah, I really like the Maverick over 93.5 points on Prize Picks. I think she's going to finish young. And honestly, she could get there even if she doesn't finish young, if she just takes her down a ton and beats her up. So, I mean, I think Maverick is a great Prize Picks play.
I think so as well. All right, let's close it out with our stream parlay. I'll pick a prop. Jake will pick a prop. This is just a small sliver of potential bets that you can make for this Saturday card. Jake has a 94-1 parlay that you don't want to miss out on. It's in the daily plug, OccupyFantasy.com. That is already posted. The link is in the description. Jake puts out his bets early in the week. If you want to get ahead of the lines, go check it out, MMADFS.com. Some of his favorite bets that still remain also end up in the plug at the end of the week. Jake, for mine, I will go. We talked about Batista against Lopez, and a great matchup for him. Batista talks about wrestling more, wants to get a finish here. I'll go with Batista by sub. I think plus 500 is probably the best line we can get for a book where we both find lines that are suitable for this parlay.
Yeah, that came down a little bit today. It was at plus 600 earlier in the week, but I think that is the best one available now. So I still think it's pretty solid at plus 500. He's coming off a sub of Kelleher. I think it would make a lot of sense for him to take this fight to the ground and submit Lopez. I'm going to match that up with another sub. Man, I mean, this guy is just an auto bet every time he's on the slate. Minner round one sub at plus 850. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, this guy has more round one subs than I would say anyone on the slate has fights in their career. So Minner round one sub at plus 850 is my bet. And if we parlay those together, it's plus 5,600.
All right, 56-1. We'll take that. If you want a 94-1 bet, again, go check out the daily plug. Little teaser there. Go check it out. That'll do it for the show. Make sure you check out Jake's work, MMADFS.com, the sheet where he breaks down every fight from a betting and DFS perspective. He has the archive over there where you can check out historical DFS slates, get all the information you need. Love checking out every week when I'm building my lineups for past reference to infer and to help me guide my future decisions in DFS. Check out OccupyFantasy.com where Jake has the plug. He puts some of his thoughts, top plays, low risk and high risk, lineup construction tips, favorite bets, best Prize Picks plays, all in one spot to help you crush the DFS play, OccupyFantasy.com. Our Occupy model is up and running. Normally gets loaded Friday evenings. Projected ownership, our proprietary rankings for FanDuel and DraftKings. Been saying it. More and more people are coming to check it out. It's crazy. You'll be surprised who's number one this week. I know it shocked Jake. It shocked me, honestly, when we loaded it up. So make sure you check it out. So that'll do it for this show. Appreciate you listening as always. Make sure you're subscribed. Give us a thumbs up. Join the Discord. OccupyFantasy.com, MMADFS.com. I think that's it. Jake, any final words?
I mean, not really. I think there's a couple guys on the slate if you play, like Rodriguez and Dawson, where you just want to be aware of the ownership in your lineups. Pay attention to construction. Only 12 fights here. Don't be duped.
Do not be duped. So I think that's a fitting closing argument there. So for Jake, I'm Brian. Appreciate you all listening, and good luck at UFC Vegas 64.